Hi. It's always important to interact when you learn, and that's still true when you're learning online. This means we need to use forums for our discussions. In this video, we're going to cover how to enter mathematics in a forum in MyOpenMath. We get to the forums by either clicking on the Forums tab or the forums link on the side. Here are a number of forums that I had created before. Within each of these, there are separate posts. Here's a post I created earlier, but let's create a new thread for this video. Make sure to give your threads some sort of title so that people understand why you're creating it. In this case, how do I enter some math? We could use this to ask a question, like, can you help me integrate the function? Now I want to type in my function, and to do that, I'm going to click on the Add New Math button. Then you type a function in much the same way that you might type a function onto a calculator or in a computer algebra system. So f of x equals x exponent 2 plus 3x plus 1. It would also be helpful to add a picture of what it is that I'm trying to integrate to help people understand my question better. To enter a graph, I'm going to start a new line because it's a large object, and I'm going to click on the Add Edit Graph button. Here, we could add all sorts of different graphs in different equation types. So let's type in our function, x squared plus 3x plus 1. Give it a plot range, a minimum and maximum value that we want to plot, and add options for how we want it to look. Line weight, whether it's dotted or dashed or solid, and maybe some arrows to indicate that our graph goes on forever in both directions. So there's our initial graph, and it doesn't look great, but we could play around with how it looks by adjusting the plot range and adjusting the graph. Now that looks a little better. It looks like the parabola we expect to see. So we insert the graph. We check that it says what we want it to say in the question. And then we could post our thread. Now, if someone clicks on the thread and they click Show, they could see our question. And if they think they can help us, they could choose to reply to it. Replying uses the same commands as the initial post. Now, we might try and reply one way. Suppose that we assume they meant the indefinite integral. Again, we click the Add New Math button. We type /int for an integral. We type in our function, x squared plus 3x plus 1. We remember our dx. And then we could type in the indefinite integral. A simple slash is enough to let MyOpenMath know that you want a fraction. Be sure not to forget your plus c. That's kind of a long equation, and so that's going to look better if we center it. It'll be easier to read. Now, as someone scans along and reads that, they'll be able to pick that out more easily. But perhaps the person asking the question actually meant, help me with a definite integral. So we can give an example of how to do a definite integral as well. Again, I'm going to add some math. You could click on the button You could also do this by clicking the single open quote in the top left corner of your keyboard. To put in limits of integration, I put an underscore for the lower limit, and then a caret, like an exponent, for the upper limit. Again, type in our function, and we can see that the definite integral looks the way we want it to. Since it's a definite integral, and we already know what the antiderivative is, what we need to do now is plug in our limits of integration. So we can type out what we get when we input 2 into the antiderivative, and subtract off what we get when we input 0, and then when we simplify that, we'll have our solution. Always be sure to double check your work. It's easy to make an arithmetic mistake, especially if you're doing arithmetic at the same time you're typing. Finally, you should have some sort of closing to your sentence. Then we can post our reply. Now, the person that originally posted could look at your answer and give you a thumbs up if it answered their question, or they could post a reply to your reply as a follow-up.